Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg.
I'm Joel.
And you know Teddy. He's the star, the real star of this channel. He's probably going to fall asleep and slump down a little bit lower. But he is here with us to wrap up the month of June and everything that we read. We both ended up having very successful reading months, didn't we?
We did.
We did.
I followed a lot of your books.
Yeah, we have a lot of books in common.
Yeah, which were amazing.
Yeah, so we read some good books this month. We tried to stick mostly to Pride reading. You did have one outlier.
One
right?
outlier,
yeah.
but it's one that you really liked and I wanted to try. So.
Yes, so it's allowed. And we don't stop reading queer books and queer stories outside of the month of June, so why not? So, but I ended up reading 9 months. I ended up reading 9 books and having 2 DNFs. How did you do in the month of June?
I have 9 books and no DNFs.
Well, look at you.
Well, I'm very selective when I say you're much more adventurous when you start reading. You just like give things a try. I think I follow you and like, okay, you liked it, I'll like it. So
I think because I had a tough start to the month of June. I had a very slow start. I think by the middle of the month, I had only read like 3 or 4 books and didn't think it was going to get much better than, and I ended up with 9. So, but I mean, 3 of them are graphic novels, but it counts.
It counts.
It's real. So,
well, 2 of mine are short stories.
And that's real. They're one of them is published separately. At least one of them is published separately. So yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So do we want to dive in, or do we want to mention we are having a little bit of a cocktail?
We are. We are having a orange Jameson and 7-Up. We discovered this while over in Scotland. Did you guys know we went to Scotland?
Ireland.
In Ireland.
And Ireland, yes. We went to the Jameson distillery and they actually served it there. And it was really, they told us it was going to be really hard to find. They have it in the town where we live. So that was a nice, fun surprise. And look at us being themed. I'm wearing you can't see it because Teddy's dragging it down. I'm wearing an Edinburgh t-shirt. I
have the Book of Kells. I really love this shirt.
That is a great shirt and it looks good on you.
Yeah, and I like a nice Celtic knot, so.
Yeah. So, let's get to the books. We have the exact same number of books. Do you want to go first or second?
I can go first. All right. I was very excited about this. Yes. So I started with The Guncle Abroad.
And this is one of the ones that we have in common.
Yeah, by Stephen Rowley.
Yes.
He did The Guncle, which we absolutely loved. And it was such a great book.
Yes.
I felt Guncle Abroad tried too hard.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite carry over what The Guncle did. The Guncle seemed like it had a really great point. Yeah. They stretched to make a point in this.
I feel like, and I liked The Guncle Abroad. I feel like I should say that. It's a fun book.
It is fun.
It's a sweet book. It's enjoyable. I think you could certainly do worse. It's great like vacation reading, or if you're looking for something light. The Guncle Abroad is great. But The Guncle has some like real heft to it that I didn't quite get from this book. And when I did my Friday reads about The Guncle Abroad, I complained about this book for like 20 minutes. And yeah. But I liked it. I really did.
It is really good. So if you like The Guncle, try it. It's good. I just think it tried a little too hard.
Yeah.
I think I was a little more forgiving about the love languages than you were, but it was interesting.
I felt like it tried a little too hard to repeat things from The Guncle. Like, I feel like the book itself, Teddy is passed out of sleep, by the way. And I feel like the whole thing in the beginning of the book where he goes on a separate travel adventure with his niece and nephew, Grant and Maisie, feels like it's trying to get him alone with the kids like they were in the first. But then the book doesn't really start until they get to their destination. And I felt like, so he tries to teach the kids love languages, which to me feels like it's repeating the first book where he teaches them Guncle rules, but a bit of a twist on it. And it just felt like, you don't have to do the same thing over and over again. No. So that was kind of my thing. But it was a good book. It really was. It really was a good book. So my first was actually another one that we have in common. Tin Man by Sarah Winman. When I did my Pride Month Pile of Possibilities, isn't that pretty? Yeah, I love doing that and showing off that foil.
Yeah.
Oh, Teddy's awake. When I did my Pride Month Pile of Possibilities, I put a couple of books on there that were sort of like white whales, books that I've had for a really long time and haven't gotten around to, and Tin Man was one of them. It's the only white whale, but I'm glad at least one of them. I got at least one of my white whales, my gay white whales, I guess, off of my list.
Pink whale?
Pink whale, there we go.
Lavender whale.
Lavender whale, even better. I got one of my lavender whales off the list. What were you going to say?
And it was really, really good.
Really good. I loved it.
We both loved it.
I think one of my concerns about this one was that people kept telling me, you are going to love this book. That it almost started to feel like a bit of pressure. Like, what if I read it and I don't like it? I don't know what I'm going to do. And I read it, and I really did love this book a great deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I loved it so much. I started talking about some of the details of it with you, and I can't remember where along the way you decided you were going to read it.
Yeah.
Immediately.
It really got me hooked on it, and it's like, okay, I'm going to read it. Stop talking.
Yeah.
And I did read it next, so we were able to talk about it.
I think you even started it, because I started it on audio, and Sarah Winman actually reads the audio, and she does a great job. And I started thinking, I really want to pivot to the book, because I feel like I really want to spend time with the text. So I think you started the audio before I was even done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she does a great job with the audio. We did run into a thing where when we were talking about it when you finished, there was a little chapter break on, especially this one toward the end. Like, there's a break.
Yeah, there's a break before the very last paragraph.
Yeah, don't read that if you don't want it spoiled. But it kind of shifts time and place, which was confusing in the audio, because when we were talking about it, you kept saying, "No, it's this," and I was like, "No, it wasn't."
It wasn't.
So that was, if you do the audio, that might be a little confusing,
because it really doesn't say they're going to a different time and location in life. And they do.
And the book really does move very fluidly back and forth in time. So I imagine on the audio, it probably would get a little more confusing than the physical book. But this is a beautiful book. So basically, the premise of this is you have three friends, Ellis, Michael, and what's the wife's name? Annie?
Annie.
So Ellis and Michael meet when they're like 12 years old, and they are friends growing up, and they seem to be headed toward a bit of a romance, but then in the future, Ellis has gotten married to Annie, and it's about their relationship over time, and it's just beautiful. It's a very sad and like lonely feeling book, but it also is really about compassion and kindness and the small things that really
and their
friendship. And yeah, it's beautiful.
A beautiful book. I loved it.
Loved it very much. And we should say we will be filming our best books of 2024. This might factor in for at least one of us into that. And we'll be, but we'll be filming that closer to the weekend. Yeah. So it'll be like your Independence Day surprise, I guess, if you live in the United States. Yeah. So you'll be hearing more about Tin Man then, maybe, possibly. What was your next book?
My next one was Small Joys by Elvin James Menza.
And this is another one I'm responsible for.
Very responsible for.
I read it in May.
But we bought this at the Golden Hare.
Yeah, in Edinburgh.
And when we were both looking at it in Edinburgh, we both like, wow, this looks really good.
When I picked it up, I had wanted to read this book already, and I just hadn't found it anywhere in the United States. I requested my library purchase a copy. They didn't. I kept looking for it on Libby and Scribd, and it never showed up. So we walked into the Golden Hare. They had it, and I was really excited. And then I think I read the back of the book to you, and you were already like welling up and getting emotional. Is that okay to say?
It's okay.
Yeah. So, and the book really follows through on that.
It does.
Yeah.
In one of your previous videos, you're doing the different questions. And one of the questions was, who would be your fictitious romance?
Or crush.
Crush. And you said you don't have crushes. I like everybody. But the one person I think we both agree on would be Muddy. And he is one of the main characters in this book.
Yeah.
And Muddy is just a delight.
He reminds me of Joel, actually. No, he really does.
He is a good guy.
He's a good guy. He likes to take care of people and make sure everybody's doing okay, and sometimes doesn't take the time to make sure he's doing okay because he's so worried about other people. Yeah.
Beautiful book.
Beautiful book. So Harley is the protagonist. He has had a very tough life. He's struggling. He's been rejected by his father, basically, and he is thinking of suicide. So, like, trigger warning, he struggles with suicidal ideation for, like, the first half of the book, roughly.
Yeah.
And
throughout the book.
And throughout, yeah, true. And he is in the woods thinking of harming himself when he happens to run into Muddy. And Muddy kind of, like, is friendly, but then it turns out Muddy is his new roommate because he's moving back in with a friend after leaving college. And then they form this really great friendship. And it's another book that's really about kindness and caring for other people and the friendships and connections that you make. And it's really a beautiful book.
It's also about taking care of each other.
Yeah.
Because Muddy sees him and knows he needs somebody in his life to help take care of him. Because he is struggling.
Yeah.
And so Muddy just becomes that person to him to take care of him and be his friend. And there's another guy in the group who I find horribly mean.
Yeah.
But you kind of learn to love him.
He turns out to he's an onion. He has layers.
Yeah, many layers.
Yeah.
So,
but the friend group at the center of the book is real. They have great chemistry. It's a great bunch of people.
3 guys, 2 girls, and they just have this really great relationship.
Yeah, and they take care of each other. They check in with each other. And it is also about, because some of them have a little bit of trouble communicating, and they work on that throughout the book and get better at it. Yeah. So
highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's really good. You might be hearing about that at the end of the week,
too.
Hear
about that again.
And I'm not going to say that about any other books because we don't want to spoil everything. So that was your next one, right?
Right.
All right, my next one was...
I gotcha.
Radiant, The Life and Line of Keith Haring by Brad Gooch. I got this earlier this year from Montana Book Company. It's a gorgeous book, but I did listen to it on audio. It has really great photographs inside. It's got great end papers, really well put together.
Just like some fun Polaroids. That was a thing back then.
Yeah. So it's about Keith Haring, obviously. Keith Haring was an artist. And kind of in an Andy Warhol vein. He actually was friends with Andy Warhol in the 1980s.
It's one of his more common art that you would probably recognize.
Those are the things. You've seen Keith Haring, even if you don't think you know the name.
Yeah.
And it's about his life, obviously. And I think the thing I really like about this as a biography is that it allows him to be a really complicated person and talks about ways in which he sometimes meant well, sometimes could be a little bit self-involved and kind of do things. Like at one point he opens a pop shop in Tokyo and hasn't really considered differences between a pop shop in the United States and in Tokyo. Went up to Africa, I think it was once, and did art, and people were kind of offended because they thought he was doing cultural appropriation. And that's not what he intended, but you know, it just allows him to be this complicated person who sometimes didn't act in the most magnanimous way, but also was really giving, and he loved collaboration with other people. He lifted up a lot of artists who would have otherwise been on the fringe and did a lot of really good things. He was a great political activist toward the end of his life. He died at like 31 years old of AIDS in 1990 or 1991. So even though he had this very short career, he did a lot and achieved a lot. It's a great artist, and I really did enjoy the book. I think it is long, and it does sometimes feel like it's getting into a level of minutia that you don't necessarily need, but I really appreciated it, and as someone who's specifically a fan of Keith Haring's work, it was nice to get to know him a little bit better. And it allows him to also, when it talks about it, it doesn't treat his life like it's a straight line toward being famous. It kind of explores the other directions things could have gone. It talks about how the graffiti art that was happening in New York City when he moved to New York City kind of helped him find his place, first of all, but also helped his art feel relevant to people because there was already a foundation for people to kind of appreciate what he did. And I didn't realize a lot of the art that he did was free drawn. He didn't necessarily plan things. A lot of the time he would kind of go in and just draw, and people would always be astounded because they'd say, well, I have to prepare and do all this stuff. And he would just do it. And part of it is the repetition. It's a really interesting book. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I will probably do it soon.
Yeah. It's a long book. Like the audio is
14,
I think it's like 22 hours.
It was long.
Yeah, it's a long audio. But that's how I listened to it. Or read it, rather. What did you have next?
I did Small Joys, so my next one was Tin Man that we just talked about.
Yeah.
So I read it right after him.
Yeah.
Great book.
Yeah. And then my next one was actually The Guncle Abroad. And we already talked about that. So we already talked about it. So let's just jump to the next one, which is actually a library book. So I don't have a copy of. It's In Tongues by Thomas Grattan. And I liked that book. It's kind of about, it's got like a mean gay vibe, but in a kind of fun way. And also a very resonant way. I think there are a lot of nuances in that book. I kept talking to you about it as I was reading it. And it was fun. So you have this protagonist, Gordon, who in 2001 is in his early 20s and he's just gotten out of a relationship. And in a performative bit of pique, steals money from his ex, or soon-to-be ex, and packs up a suitcase and goes to the bus station and goes to New York City, where he quickly meets a lesbian who becomes a good friend of his, and she helps him get a job as a dog walker. And then this job as a dog walker puts him into the sphere of a couple named Philip and Nicola, who own an art gallery together. And he becomes entwined in the lives of this rich gay couple. And it's kind of about the class boundaries that happen. It gets very messy, but in very kind of rich and nuanced ways. And I actually had a lot of fun reading that book. So
you told me a lot of it. So
I did.
It was actually fun.
Yeah. So I don't think you even need to read it at this point because I talked so much about it. Yeah. So what did you have next?
My next one was on a recommendation of you, Fire Exit by Morgan Talty.
Yes.
We both read Night of the Living Res, which we both really liked.
Yeah.
And this had just come out. And so I kind of wanted to jump on it because we both liked the first one and really enjoyed the second one.
Yes.
So
good book.
Yeah. Fun book.
Yeah. And that one, you have Charles Lamisway, who is living on the edge of the Penobscot Reservation. He actually can't live on the reservation because he is a white man. But really, the book is sort of exploring the boundaries of like blood quantum and things like that, because he grew up on the reservation to a large degree because his mother married someone who was part of the Penobscot tribe. And once he turned 18, he wasn't allowed to live there. So it's kind of exploring these dynamics of what it means to be part of a community in really interesting ways, I thought. So, good book.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. My next one is another book that we have in common, Homebody by Theo Parish, which we don't have a copy of. I'm sorry.
Where is it?
He's in charge of holding the books up while I have Teddy in my lap. So, Homebody by Theo Parish is a graphic memoir, and it has an audio book. And I heard that they just did an audio of Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which is supposed to be really good. And this is kind of in that same vein. They kind of add sound narration to it. Like sometimes if somebody's walking, you'll hear like footsteps, leaves rustling, things like that. It's a beautiful audio production.
Really, really was good. I did it today, so.
Yeah, just very fresh in your mind. And it's just about Theo Parish not knowing exactly where they stand and kind of coming to terms with being non-binary and how difficult it was because they didn't feel like they belonged on either end of the spectrum and didn't feel like they were transgender. And once they heard the word non-binary, made sense.
Made sense. Yeah. But it also kind of gives you an insight of how somebody who is non-binary or transgender, when you hear your old pronoun and you hear your dead name and just the struggles that they go through when they hear something from the past. Yeah. And I thought they did a really good job with it.
I thought so too. It's an hour of your time. I think if you speed it up to 1.2, it's 50 minutes. Yeah. So honestly, I would encourage pretty much everyone to read Homebody because I think it's kind of a great book that sums up a lot of things that people within the queer community experience, but particularly non-binary and transgender people. Yeah. Although that's not how Theo Parish identifies. I just think it's really great to help create a sense of understanding and community. And it's such a short read. Even if you don't want to do the audio, the graphic memoir itself is probably really short and easy to read. So that was a good book.
Really good.
And another one we had in common.
It is.
What do you have next?
My next one was Gator by M. Tasia. It's in a series that I kind of like. It's the Fire Lake series, and this was number 6, which I've really enjoyed the Fire Lake series. It's a group of Navy SEALs, all gay, of course. Yeah. And they form this community once they get out of the service. And they have a private investigator business or security business. And so they do a lot of things to help them. So I really kind of enjoyed the book. And halfway through the book, one of the guys has...
I'm laughing because you told me what happened.
One of the guys can read minds, and there's telepathy and...
Was there telekinesis
Telekinesis, too, and it's like, oh, no.
So when you told me that, I was like, what? Because I read the first book in this series back in May, and it was like, that series?
Yeah.
So,
and it just popped up in this series. And it's with a group of some people that they help save. Were in this genetic testing program.
Weird.
And just,
that's a weird left turn for this
over
series.
My head, and it's like, it was fine.
And that feels kind of unfortunate because you were really enjoying that series. Yeah. A lot of the time, you would read them before going to bed. Like, it was good before bed reading. Happy reading, calm you down, get you ready to go to bed. And then this one kind of ruined that a little bit.
So I don't think I'm going to... I don't know. I may see what the next one comes out. If they keep on with this little theory thing going on, I'm going to be like, no.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about my next one after you get done, because it was one I liked.
Okay. There you go. Well, my next one was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagirdar. This is something we got in Ireland at the Winding Stair Bookshop in Dublin.
Such a cute shop.
Such a great shop. I loved it.
Yeah.
And we actually went there twice in one day. We went there in the morning. I asked for recommendations from the employee who was there. And she was so good and helpful and gave really great recommendations about Irish authors that in America would be good for an American to get to know. So we went back, one, because we loved the store, but two, because I realized after we had left that I didn't ask her about queer Irish authors or Irish authors of color. So we went back, I asked her the question, she thought about it for a couple of minutes, and then she said, well, I do know one that's both, but it's YA. I don't know if you're into that. And I said, no, I can read. I read YA all the time. And it was The Henna Wars. So Adiba Jagirdar is originally from Bangladesh, I believe, and immigrated to Ireland when she was around 8. And that is actually the story of the protagonist in the book, Dishat, as well. And in it, she has experienced a bit of like racism growing up, and now the school assigns a business competition. You have to create a business, and whoever has like the best business plan, makes the most money, like combination of those two things, will win a cash prize. So she decides to do henna. But another girl at the school also decides to do henna, hence the title, The Henna Wars. And of course, this happens to be the girl that she had a flirtation with. So it's a lesbian book. It's an Irish book. And it deals with racism and cultural appropriation. It's not 100% great. It's kind of like The Guncle. I had fun. I think it's a great book. But if I really wanted to, I could like pick this book apart and say like, well, this didn't quite work and this didn't quite work. And at the end of the day, I should not do that because it's a fun book. And it deals with a lot, for like a young adult book, it deals with a lot of heavy issues like racism and cultural appropriation and things like that. And you know what? I'll never complain about kids being introduced to those topics.
Exactly.
So it was a successful read. Thank you to The Winding Stair. Again, if you're ever in Dublin, it's near the Halfpenny Bridge. Definitely visit.
Yeah, right off of it.
Yeah, definitely visit Winding Stair Bookshop.
I just want to, I know we've talked about it when we talked about our visit, but when Greg went in there and asked, do you have this, this, and this? She thought about you. Have a seat right there, and I'll bring over some books for you.
Yeah.
She brought like 5-6 books.
Yeah.
And it's like, what great customer service.
And every single one of those books was something I would immediately take home.
Yeah.
And it was actually hard to pick one from the pile.
Yeah. I mean, it was a small store. She was by herself, but she took this time, and
yeah,
beautiful.
So yes, and I'll link the video where we did our May reading wrap up because we talk a lot about that vacation. So it will be where in the description box
down below.
Yeah, it's fun to say that down below. So what did you have next?
All right.
We're all excited.
This is so me. Thank you to Danny, that bookish bear. He sent me a message on Instagram and said, I think you will love this, and I loved it.
It worked.
It was The Lights of Knockbridge Lane by Roan Parish. And it is a number 3 in a series, and I did read the first one, Must Love Dogs? No.
Oh, Better Than People?
Better Than People.
Yeah. You did read that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a good one. It's about a guy who was a dog walker, and he liked dogs more than people.
Yeah.
But
But he finds romance, clearly.
He finds romance.
Yeah.
So this was the number 3 book, and it's funny. You open up the book, and it has a map of this little town and where everything is. So I love a book with a map. You do.
I do.
So you kind of carry on the characters throughout. So it was a very sweet book.
I think I might do a little Christmas in July and catch up to it.
Yeah.
In July. Yeah. There is an audio of it out there, right? Or is it just in the... we'll find that out.
We'll find that out.
Don't worry about it.
I read it. It's about this guy who and his daughter, they moved back to Garnet Run, a little town in Wyoming. And the guy who across the street, everybody called a witch. Just he was odd. The house glowed green from like the basement windows.
That's weird.
It is weird.
Is it Christmas lights?
No.
Oh.
No, you're not going to like this part.
Oh.
He loved critters and plants, and he was trying to figure out how to grow renewable energy from plants. But he had like spiders and snakes and lizards and everything. So just this off-the-wall guy who had some social issues, and it plays throughout the book of why he has social issues. So I like a book like this, even though it's a male-on-male romance, that deals with some issues that people have.
Like small joys.
Like small joys. Yeah. And how to overcome them or live with them or explain to somebody about them.
Yeah.
And beautiful book. But anyway, the one guy's daughter wanted, her Christmas wish was to have the most lights on their house. And the father had no money. And so he would post on Instagram, I want lights on my house. And people over time started sending strands of lights. And they knew they weren't going to make it as big as the world record. But it was their journey to get all the lights. And the little girl loved the guy across the street. And she kind of brought him out of his house and into their lives. And it was beautiful. I loved it.
So I think I'm going to have to do some Christmas in July, as long as it's available on audio.
So thank you, Danny. I loved it.
So, and on that note, my next one, so I did this so backwards, and I'm going to lump them both together. So if you want to grab both. First, I did Heartstopper Volume 5, which is which one? This one. So, because we had bought Heartstopper Volume 5 earlier this year. So I had finished the Henna Wars, and you weren't home. You were traveling. So I thought, I don't really feel like watching a movie. I'm just going to pick up a book. I want something I can read in one sitting. Heartstopper Volume 5. And then after I finished it, I realized I hadn't read Volume 4. So I actually did finish another book in between these, but I ended up reading both of them. Because once I read Volume 5, I felt like I had to catch up and do Volume 4. And I really actually liked Volume 4 a lot. I'm glad I went back and did it. And I think what's great about that is it kind of ties in with what you were saying. You have this couple, Nick and Charlie, they're teenagers. I think Teddy would really like to go. So say bye-bye to Teddy. Bye. And they're in high school. Charlie had suffered really bad bullying before the series even began. And again, kind of had suicidal ideation. He's dealing with trauma. He kind of started to get through it, and then he developed a crush on Nick, who is a classmate of his, and then obviously they become a couple. There's no way to talk about the series without spoiling that.
You kind of know it.
But it's about, it's literally on the covers of the books. So it's about them forming a relationship, and you have this friend group, and that's kind of what it is. It's like, I love that these books exist, because how wonderful for teenagers, young adults, to read things where people have healthy conversations about what they're feeling, what they're afraid of, what they're struggling with, and help each other through life. Like, you have this really solid friend group. You have your partner who you're with, who just helps you. And that is not the way you or I were raised.
No.
When we were kids, you had to pretend you were fine even if you weren't. That was the whole thing. Like, you pretend you're fine, and if something's wrong, you do not talk about it. And that's it. And if you have baggage, you try to swallow it down and prevent other people from seeing it, because we thought it would be embarrassing. And I'm so glad that these things exist to teach people different ways of doing things, because clearly those ways weren't working. So it's just a really sweet cinnamon bun book.
There's a series too, and the TV series is really good.
On Netflix in the US. Yeah. And it is really good. So I'd recommend that as well. And, it's just about their relationship. There is only going to be one more installment. Volume 6 will be the final. And I imagine in that one, because they're a year apart in age, and in Volume 5, they're starting to deal with, Nick is getting ready to apply to universities, and he's trying to figure out where he wants to go, if he wants to stay close so he can be with Charlie, or if they want to do a long distance. So I imagine volume 6 will kind of end with him going to college, but we'll find out. Just really sweet cinnamon bun books, very lovely and sweet and delightful. And yeah, if you don't want to read the books, watch the series, because you haven't read any of the books yet.
I haven't. I probably will this winter do it. But if you watch the series, I just got to throw out there, Olivia Colman plays one of the mothers, and she is just a delight.
Yeah.
God, I love her.
In the first season, it almost feels like, I don't know why they got Olivia Colman for this, because that's not a very big part. And then there's like one scene toward the end of the season that justifies everything.
Every reason to have her there.
And then she has a bit of a bigger part in the second season. And I think she's going to, because the mother, Nick's mother, kind of pops up a lot in the other books as well. So
I just love that.
She's delightful.
She is so much fun to watch on Instagram. She has a small role in The Bear.
Yeah.
And she is perfect in The Bear.
And I think she only showed up for like 3 hours to film that and just knocked it out of the park. We are an Olivia Colman household. So, what did you have next? I probably threw things off by lumping 2 books together.
No, I think we're good.
Yeah.
My next was a big disappointment for me. It was Fellow Travelers by Thomas Mallon.
Which we were both really looking forward to.
I wanted to watch the series, and it's on Paramount, which we don't have. It's like, I'm going to read the book.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of read through the description, and I didn't really realize how political it was. It takes place in the McCarthy area, like 54 through 57. And I just thought Fellow Travelers. I thought it's just these 2 dudes who traveled around and tried to play straight, but they were a couple. No, it was this big political gambit for years and years, and they have a relationship on the side.
And from what you're talking, is it like a dom-sub relationship? Or would you classify it as that? Or
I would almost say dom-sub, but
I think was a big surprise to both of us.
Huge to me. But to sum it up is like the younger guy who is like 23 and the older guy who is like late 30s. The older guy wanted somebody in his life, but didn't love him. And the younger guy was totally in love with this man. And it kind of deals with the relationship of loving somebody but being okay with not being loved in return. And I don't like that. The book was good. Let me say the book was good. It's well written, good story. I just didn't expect for it to be political, and right now it's not what I want to read.
Yeah.
And
I think a lot of the dynamics of the relationship, it's one of those cases. It sounds like, I didn't read it, obviously, but it sounds like it's one of those cases where a book is not what you expected it to be, and it doesn't. Sometimes that pans out, and you're like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And in this case, it doesn't sound like it panned out.
It didn't pan out for me. So now I'm not that vested in wanting to watch the TV series, which I think the TV series goes, and this stops right at like 58. Then they jump forward to 91. I think the series goes through the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
That's kind of what I had read on the series, and it's like, oh, I'll read the book. The book stops at 57. And it's a little disappointing for me.
Yeah. Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a good book. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah. Which is fair. That's fair. So, do you want me to go?
Sure.
All right. So, my last book of June, and then I have 2 DNFs I can talk about at the end, was The Safe Keep by Yael van der Wouden. This had been one of my most anticipated books for the middle of 2024, and I reached out to Avid Reader Press, and they sent me this advanced reader's copy. But then I didn't get to it before it was actually released, and once it was released, I had access to the audio. So I think I had sort of hit a wall a little bit toward the end of June. He is passed out asleep on the floor behind us.
Oh, on his mat.
Oh, he's on his mat?
Yes.
Oh, he never uses that mat. No. So I'm sorry. That's like a big deal for us.
Yeah, it is.
It's a huge deal. He doesn't sleep on that.
Because it was Jamie's and Guinness's. And
he is so respectful of things that had belonged to Guinness and Jamie.
Yeah.
It's kind of adorable, but at the same time, we've always been kind of like, it's okay for you to use it. So it's nice. This is a huge moment for us, actually. Anyway, I was kind of hitting a wall. I read a lot of gay male books, and I think I was really ready to get out of that a little bit. So like Homebody was great. The Henna Wars was great. Safe Keep, a book with like lesbian intrigue post-World War II, was great. I wasn't sure I was liking it in the beginning because it does feel like a very familiar setup. You have this, it's kind of Pulp Fiction more psychological thriller-ish. And that's not a genre I read a lot because you can kind of tell, like, okay, so everybody, the backstories are going to be important and people might not necessarily be presented, even the protagonist, Isabel I'm talking about, might not necessarily be presenting things as they are. But the directions this book goes are so interesting. I couldn't stop talking to you about it the day I finished it because I just found it fascinating. And how pretty is the cover of this book? Pretty. It's really pretty. And pears actually do come up in the plot, which is kind of fun. Not in a call me by your name kind of a way.
You knew exactly what I was thinking.
I knew exactly what he was thinking.
In my face.
Yeah, it's like, no. Not like that. Like they eat pears.
No, that's nice. That's so wholesome.
Yeah. The rest of the book, there are parts that are really not wholesome. But anyway, so Isabel is living in her family home, but they had moved there because they themselves were displaced during World War II and ended up living in a home. And she's now the only one who lives there. Her brothers have gone off and are living in other places and doing other things, but she's the one who has become very attached to this house and this place, and she's sort of clinging to it because she also knows she's about to get displaced again because one of her brothers is going to inherit the house when their uncle dies, and eventually it's supposed to be his family home. So she is supposed to be going somewhere else at some point. So it's about displacement after World War II in a lot of ways. And it's about a lot of other really tricky things from World War II, like issues of complacency and bad things people do during wartime and the ramifications of that and the trauma that comes from war. And you can't really talk about those things without spoiling the book, so that's as much as I can really say about it. But anyway, Louis's girlfriend, Eva, is sent to the house, and Isabel does not like Eva. But of course, as soon as they're in a house together, you know, friction starts to happen. And it's such a good book. I really ended up liking this a lot. And it's one of those frustrating things where it's like immediately you want somebody to have read the book so you can really talk about the end, but you can't talk about it. So I just talked at you about what happened in the book. So, and bless you for letting me do that. So that was my last read of June. How did you end the month?
I ended the month and I ended it today with Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. And
because you had read this before, right?
I've never read the book.
Oh, you'd never read it?
I've never read the book.
I thought this was a reread for you.
No, I've never read the book. I've seen the movie, and I think I'm the only gay man in the world who did not cry during this movie.
I don't know how.
I cried during an AT&T commercial.
Yeah, I don't know how that's
I don't know
true.
how my soul was so dead during this movie.
I wonder if, because didn't you throw an event?
Yeah,
when you saw it, so you were probably
nervous.
thinking about like a lot of other things. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway,
Focus,
we don't have to psychologically unpack that right now.
Focus Films asked me to host an event for this because I was doing a group in Seattle at the time, and I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And so I was so nervous about the film that I probably didn't even watch it. I may rewatch it some night while on the road, or unless you want to watch it.
I would watch it with you, and we can actually cry together.
If I do.
If you do.
But the book is really good.
It is really good.
Like I said, I'd never read it. Has a lot more detail in the book because in the movie, you just see it happen. So here's my Brokeback story, if I may. You may.
So Brokeback Mountain is in a collection of Annie Proulx's short stories called Close Range. It's one of my all-time favorite books. And if you are not a short story fan, read Close Range. I don't know why I'm clapping. But anyway.
You clap.
I do. Fantastic collection. But I was working in a bookstore at Borders when I think it's Bad Dirt, which is the second collection of Wyoming stories, was published. And I didn't realize it was a sequel. So I saw it and thought, this sounds really interesting. And I bought it and I read it and I loved it. And then I was talking to someone at the bookstore about it and they said, oh, well, did you read Close Range? And I hadn't read it. So I went out and bought the book because I wanted to read it. And right about that time, they announced that Brokeback Mountain was being made and that it was a short story from Close Range. And it was gay cowboys. So I immediately read Close Range, and it has Brokeback Mountain in it. And I actually cried when I read the story and when I saw the movie. So I did them very close to each other. And I think one of the things that is really beautiful about Brokeback Mountain the story and the movie, which, by the way, was adapted by Larry McMurtry. There was another person who wrote the screenplay, but he won an Oscar for that. Larry McMurtry won a Pulitzer Prize for Lonesome Dove, which is a great book. It feels like everything that happens in the movie is true to the story, but it expands on the world to make it, obviously, the running time of a film. And it just feels like everything in the movie could be, like, that could be just a condensed version of the movie with some of the parts edited out. And that's why they really work well together to me. So, and sorry, I got passionate about that.
No, it's a really good book. So.
It is. It is. Did you have anything else for the month of June?
Not for the month of June, no.
Okay. I had 2 DNFs. We don't have to talk about them that long. I started Cinema Love by Jiaming Tang, and it was another one of my most anticipated books for the middle of the year. And that one is more kind of like a DNF for now. I'm a mood reader. I was really not in the mood for it. And that's actually part of why by the middle of the month I hadn't read a lot of books, because I spent like a week not making any progress in Cinema Love. And when I finally decided to put it down, I actually picked up In Tongues, and I read that in like 3 or 4 days. So it's just, I really wasn't in the mood for Cinema Love. So I DNF'd it, but it's not that it was a bad book. It's mostly that I just really wasn't in the mood for it. The one that I really didn't like was The Intoxicating Mr. Laval, which is going to be unhauled. And that was my other DNF. It just felt like the plot of the book didn't quite make sense, and the behavior of characters didn't make sense because it kept wanting to do twists. And reading reviews online, it seemed like that's kind of just what it's going to do. So, that wraps up June as a reading month. What about July? So I have already started reading Hombrecito, and I forgot to grab my copy of it, but that's how I'm starting the month, and I'm really loving it so far. I got 30 pages into it this morning. What do you have coming up?
I don't have anything.
You don't have plans?
I do not have anything lined up.
You are actually... So we won't talk about it now. You're going to have to stay tuned for our July wrap-up, but you're actually already making your plans for August. Potentially August.
Potentially, so. And I may move it to
a different
July.
Month.
Because the one I do want to read is the Glenn Burke story. Glenn Burke was the first black gay baseball player in the major leagues. And he's also, there's a little controversy, or maybe not, but he invented the high five.
That high five.
And everything leads to he did kind of invent it, because back then they all did a low five. They'd walk by and low five. He goes, no, this is really awesome. I'm going to do a high five. And that's how it started.
Oh.
But he didn't really want to play baseball. I think he wanted to prove a black gay man can play baseball. And as soon as he came out and he was successful, he's like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah.
But it also goes through the struggles he had to just get to that point.
Yeah.
It does sound I'm excited about reading it. I love baseball books. We're in baseball season, so why not?
That's true. And, that should be a really interesting book.
Yeah.
I look forward to your thoughts on it.
Because many years ago, we did The Art of Fielding.
Yes.
Which was a really good book about
That
baseball.
was probably our very first buddy read, actually, because we read it very close together when it was originally published. So
a really good book. So I may do sports, baseball.
Some things.
Things.
So I'm starting my month with Hombrecito. I do have 2 library books, and I moved one of them out of the way by accident. But it's a Check Please. So it's a YA graphic novel. It should be fun.
I may, if you're done before it has to go back to the library, I may do it. It's sports. Yeah,
it's sports. And so it's a teenager, I believe, because it's YA. Yeah. But he was I forgot this part until I looked at it. He was a figure skater. Now he's a hockey player, but he is also an amateur patissier, which just sounds delightful, right? So I happened to see it at our local used bookstore, and somebody had recommended it a long time ago. And then I thought, you know what? I want to see if the library has it, and they did. So I have that from the library. It's just somewhere else because I cleared out space for all of this. I also got What I'd Rather Not Think About by Gente Postuma, translated by Sarah Timmer Harvey. This had been longlisted. I think it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and it sounds sad. There is a queer element. I think it's about they're twins. I was reading the back of the book to see they are twins, and it's narrated by the female, and her brother has committed suicide. but he was gay. So I kind of thought about squeezing it in during Pride Month because of that element, but I just really didn't want to depress myself. So it kind of, because when it was in the running for the International Booker, it was giving me, reminding me of All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews, which I loved and kind of deals with a similar issue. So I have this from the library. The question is if I'm going to be in the mood to be depressed. So I could do that, and then I am completely blanking on the name of the person who brought the book up. An hour ago, I remembered the name of the person. I'm sorry. So when we were in Ireland, there was a book called The Coast Road by Alan Murren, and I saw it in a lot of bookstores, and it looked interesting, but I didn't get it because I just decided to get some other things like The Henna Wars instead. And somebody commented, and I'm sorry, again, I just can't think of the name right now. An hour ago, I would have had this. And they said, hey, I just read The Coast Road. It's an Irish author, and they loved it. And I was like, but it's on Scribd. Awesome. So I also want to try to catch up to that this month. So that's kind of like loose plans for July. Yeah. Some things I might do and might not do, and some things you might do and might not do.
Yeah, I just don't know. I'm traveling a lot, so it'll probably be a couple of long audiobooks. So,
yeah. And we'll see how the month goes. But that's kind of like loose plans for that. And it was a good Pride month for reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Out of my 9 books, 8 were LGBTQ. 2 were male and male romance. So I did break outside of the romance books. I do some just good queer reads. And I loved all the ones I did.
Yeah, there are so many different varieties of story that you can read. Like I said, at one point I realized that even when I was reading just books about gay men, you had so many different ways of living and life and perspectives on it, like Tin Man, Radiant, The Guncle Abroad, In Tongues. Like those are very different approaches to that topic. So that's one of the things I really love about June, because it's just fun to do all that.
It is.
So
I did find 2 books in a series that I really liked. I couldn't find them anywhere, but I did find them on Apple. So they're $1.99 each. So I'll probably buy these last 2 books and do that as my comfort cinnamon bun read before bed.
Oh, yeah. Because you've been waiting for those
I've been waiting for those forever. Jackie McMenamin told me about it. Yeah. It's the Dr. Thornton series. And the last 2 have just been hanging out there I cannot find. So I'm going to do those. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's June. Potential for July. Let us know what you've been reading and loving and what you plan for July in the comment section down below. We should get to, we're not big drinkers, so this was an interesting choice for us.
It was a hot day and we did a lot today. So this was a nice chill down.
Yeah. So anyway, let us know what you've been up to in reading and what you are planning for July in the comment section down below. As always, we really appreciate your time, and we will be back. Until next time, happy reading.
Bye.